wow, guess who's back? It's me. Drop or not, it is returned. For anyone who wasn't already aware, Drop or Not was my little series where I went through and tried every single seasonal show. Because I do that. And I also did that for this season, the spring season of anime. However, though I was planning to do another Drop or Not in the style of Drop or Not Blitz Mode, which I did during Komovage in January, none of the shows were interesting. They were just bland and boring. There was nothing that I had anything particularly nuanced to say about. So I just felt completely unmotivated to talk about them at all. However, there was a couple of shows that I didn't drop, a couple, and that's what this video is going to be. It's just me going through and trying all the stuff that I decided was worth at least one more episode to see if I'm gonna finish literally anything from this season. And starting off with something I watched a little bit ago, but not that long, and that is Ao-chan. Because I had seen the first episode, I thought it was moderately funny. Mainly, there was one particular joke that made me laugh really hard, and that was the reason I thought that it was worth giving it another episode, especially since I believe the episodes are like half length. Um, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure, yeah. Um, and I watched the second episode, and it was really boring and not feeling it at all. And I've come to realize like what the real issue with Ao-chan is, because it's not terrible. It's occasionally funny. Ao-chan's design is really cute. I like her design a lot. I I'm not averse to have this whole sort of like edgy comedy type of affair. However, more what it is that it just ends up leaving me really impatient because the basis for all the humor is basically just her misunderstanding things. That's basically that just is the whole show, is her misunderstanding something to be lewd when it's not, and then that going down a rabbit hole. And I was just looking at this and the constant like sexual tension between her and this dude, and I'm like, yeah, we're just gonna sit around for 12 episodes waiting for these characters to have sex, and they're never going to because this is anime. Um, so I was like, I know it's not gonna give me like satisfaction. Second episode wasn't very funny, and like I mean, her design is cute, but there's plenty of other shows I could watch if I just want to stare at a cute design for 20 minutes. I mean, for example, I'm blanking Kitsune, uh, the Fox Girl show, Senko-san. There we go. Which I also dropped because I thought it was kind of boring. It's just generally I feel like there's nothing really it offered me. I was really just hoping that the second episode would be really funny, um, because then I would get something out of it, and like the fact that there was a joke that I thought was pretty funny in the first episode was more what like had got my hopes up, but then the second episode was just so formulaic that I kind of lost all interest in continuing it. So that's that. Next up, Hitoribocchi. Let's see how this one is. So I finished watching Hitoribocchi, that anime about the girl who struggles with social interaction. Oh wait, that's like a billion anime. But yeah, it was okay. So this definitely was one of the ones I don't necessarily want to say I had high hopes for, but that like I felt the most confident in saying it would be good. Like it felt like a very straightforward type of premise that wouldn't be too challenging to continue developing in a way that's entertaining and funny. And I liked the mood and tone and characters that based on what I had seen of it in the first episode. Most prominently, what appealed to me was the soundtrack, actually. I felt like the it had a lot of character and personality to it. Something that you don't often get in comedy soundtracks. It's often a very kind of samey, light-hearted style that doesn't really stick out at all. It's just sort of like the equivalent of lo-fi on an analysis video. It's like there to have sound in the background, but it doesn't significantly contribute to the tone, or it's just really sort of generic where it's like dramatic things happens, hyper dramatic music plays, comedy, then it's just sort of like chipper, like staccato strings or something like that, or like pizzicato strings, or whistling, or like a recorder. Like it's pretty straightforward oftentimes. This one, it's got like kind of a jazzy feel to it a lot of the time. It's got a lot of character to it in a way that I really appreciate, and it made it much more watchable. Like I've noticed, like if a show has a good soundtrack, I am much more willing to sit through things that I would consider to be boring because there's like that one element that I can sort of hold on to. And I mean, I think that's true for like if I can find one thing that grabs me, I'm more willing to sit through something that I'm not interested in. But compared to say something being like really good looking visually, if I'm bored by it, then it's not going to do as much for me, and that's not going to really hold me compared to if it has like a really good soundtrack. Um, so yeah, first episode was pretty good. It wasn't very funny, but I just liked the tone. It had a very like sort of warm, pleasant, like a nice hug. It just felt comforting. But as I continued, it definitely felt more like the appeal for me shifted into the more comedic side of things. I There's a lot of things that I did like a lot about the first half or so of the series. I'd say really after about episode 7 or 8 was when I just stopped enjoying Hitoribocchi. And prior to that, the things I liked, well, it's quite well animated. Um, the like way the characters animate is quite expressive, and extremely consistent. And I like the character designs a lot. I like how baggy all their clothes are, and the sort of uh, doofy looks on everybody's faces. It reminded me quite a bit of Mitsuboshi Colors, um, except it felt like it had like a lot of the elements of Mitsuboshi Colors I liked, but then also like looked better and was had characters that I thought were a little more interesting, at least just to start off. And like Bochi's, I think like the best character by far is like Bochi's, the first friend she makes, the one that's like the delinquent type, because she actually has like she's more of the straight man type character, but also that she's more above the situation and that she's like willing to goof around, but she's also like emotionally invested in things, like the moment where she's wandering around the school with Bochi and she'll tap on Bochi's shoulder, and she turns around, looks, doesn't see anywhere, is confused, like little gags like that, but she's still generally, a really nice person. And like I liked all the voice acting too. I think like the vocal delivery is generally pretty compelling. However, where my issue arises is in kind of a couple places. Like I could see Bochi being like a 6 for me, um, if not even with the fact that I feel like it got boring, which is one of my complaints. If not for the fact that it didn't annoy me, and this is my issue, because like at its peaks it's a lot better than a lot of shows I would rate similarly, because like usually a 5 for me is like something that I just thought was kind of bland from start to finish. But Bochi does have those peaks where I think it gets pretty darn good and I was enjoying myself, but it kind of pissed me off at points, particularly with the character of Bochi's childhood friend, which I just thought was unfathomably stupid, because they try and make us take this seriously. The issue for me with that arises from a couple different points. First off, all of the characters in Hitoribocchi are retards. They are the stupidest, dumbest, most moronic characters. They don't like, they just act really, really dumb all the time. And that's where the comedy and the misunderstandings and everything comes out of, is just the fact that these characters are so stupid. Um, so when you try and apply any type of serious, dramatic like weight to things, I'm just looking at this and I'm like, but all these characters are like morons. I was never taking it serious to begin with, and like especially Bochi in particular, like she just is really dumb, and that's the joke. Um, and then but the thing is, like, so the premise, if you haven't seen it, is that her childhood friend, when they're going to different schools, and when Bochi is entering middle school, because Bochi struggles to make friends, her childhood friend is like, all right, we're not friends anymore until you befriend your entire class. And it's really sad, and she's like, boo hoo, boo hoo. Um, but she's doing it so that Bochi like actually has to overcome her social anxiety and make some new friends, because this childhood friend was her only friend for all of elementary. And that premise, like, I can accept. I thought it was a little like, the way it's presented is a little over the top, but like I was like, okay, this is the premise. Like, I'm usually willing to accept stuff I might think is dumb if it's for the sake of establishing a premise, because you have to get to there somehow, and sometimes there's not always a super easy, efficient way to establish the premise you want, and you don't want to spend too much time establishing a premise when the show is more about uh, being rooted in that premise than leading up to it. So I was like, sure, okay, I'll take it. However, there's a point later in the series where Bochi meets her childhood friend again, or they run into each other on the street, and she's walking with like three friends, um, and her childhood friend like won't face her, won't speak to her, and like they're both crying. She's uh, like, it's for your own good. I'm sorry, but I'm so happy that you've made some friends. And Bochi's like, I'll make all the friends so that I can speak to you again. And I'm just sitting here like, did she not meet the quota? Like, does she literally have to befriend every single person in her class before she can speak to her closest friend? That's that's retarded. Why am on what basis am I going to take this seriously? Because it's so stupid. And that was the point where it kind of lost me completely emotionally. Because before that, I had been, I thought all the characters were dumb, but like I still felt something for them. But after that point, it just like I lost all emotional investment on that front, and it was only had the comedy going for it from that point forward. And that's sort of the issue, is that I feel like not only does that happen, but then the show also just becomes less funny. And it's not necessarily out of having like changing style of humor, but more that I feel like at a certain point the show just ran out of material, because the dialogue was already pretty repetitive, as is the case with a lot of comedy anime. But like after a certain point, it felt like they were just the only thing they were doing was repeating gags that had already been done before. That there was like no new material being introduced, nothing really new. It just felt like the characters were kind of sitting around and running in circles. And it was also at this point that I noticed a couple other things. Like the characters don't the characters I won't say don't, but they very rarely do anything. It's like they're at school, they talk a little bit at school, they talk about how Bochi is going to befriend it someone, or her struggles with befriending someone. They run, try and befriend person, they go home. And that's it. That's all that happened. The characters don't do anything else. There's like one episode where they they go to like karaoke and stuff, but that's about it. Like for the most part, the characters just walk somewhere, walk back, trying to befriend, running around trying to befriend someone, and it's like you realize how like limited the scope of the series feels. That there's so little happening in these characters' lives, and that also leads me to another complaint, and this is sort of like paired with like the loss of like emotional the investment is like this attachment to the word friend that I don't really understand. I mean, maybe this is because of the fact that I was homeschooled, so I never really had like that type of experience. But like I've interacted with people, I've become friends with people before. It's not like I'm a total social outcast. And like in my experience, how you become friends with someone is you go up to them, you talk to them, um, then you give your names, you introduce each other yourself to each other, you talk, you chat, you leave, then you come back and another day you chat some more, then like maybe a third time you chat some more, and then after that point you're like, oh, we're friends. There's never a point where you're like, will you be my friend? That just doesn't happen because that's not how friendship works. Friendship is about friendship is like a descriptive term for a type of relationship, not a prescriptive term. So it doesn't really make sense that she's so attached to this specific terminology, except for the fact that her dumb childhood friend is forcing her to make friends with every single person in her class, which is absurd. So like that part, like I couldn't help but think that that was pretty dumb, the amount of weight they put on this singular word and the way they depict it. So it's like across all those things, like it was like a mix of like my loss of interest, and then like as I was losing interest I was noticing more and more things that sort of rubbed me the wrong way about the show. And like overall it does have its positive sides. Like there are definitely things I enjoyed. I got a lot of genuine enjoyment out of the first half or so of the series, but um, in the end, it kind of annoyed me and got pretty boring. So, unfortunately, I cannot recommend Hitoribocchi, despite the fact that I finished it. Next. So I watched episode 3 of Nobunaga-sensei, and it was I'm gonna have to pass on this one. I watched the first 2 episodes back when I was doing my seasonal, you know, watch through, and I thought it was alright. It was entertaining. Nothing special, nothing great. I wasn't expecting it to be anything more than like a 6 out of 10 at most. Uh, but the thing is, like watching through stuff now, especially right after watching Hitoribocchi, which I ended up finding pretty disappointing. I just don't have the patience for something that's not going to be offering me that much. And Nobunaga Sensei, like the main appeal is it's just kind of like a fan servicey uh, comedy short. Like it's really easy to watch. Each episode's only 7 minutes, so like watching 2 episodes initially was like not a hassle at all. Girls are relatively cute though. They have like a weird blush look on them that looks kind of weird. Um, but like it's not. I guess like it doesn't pander to me hard enough that I felt like I was like, oh, I'm really willing to sit through this. Especially this episode in particular, I just noticed a lot of stuff that either I didn't notice or I just sort of forgotten. Like the vocal delivery, particularly on this one new girl that's introduced, like she's really screaming every line, and it's really annoying. The soundtrack is pretty darn bad, in the sense that like it just doesn't musically match the tone of the show at all. A lot of the music sounds really serious, but the tone of the show is like lightly comedic, and it's not even like it's using it for like a funny contrast. It more feels like it's just what they had, so they're using it. and a lot of the music is super repetitive and is mixed too loud and just generally is kind of grating on the ears. And um, also, a lot of the tracks are really short, so like it's constantly, and they also are all like really stylistically different. So it's constantly switching between these abrasive, annoying, loud, short songs in completely different styles. So it gets really obnoxious very quickly. I was kind of fed up with that. Um, and generally, like, it wasn't all that funny either. Like, I mean, at the end when, like, he's fondling the girl by accident, and then the other girl walks in, it's like, ha ha ha. Oh, what a funny situation, isn't that? But nothing that really had me laughing or just super engaged in. I can't wait to see what happens next. Again, it's a show that I could very easily see myself or someone else just sort of watching because it's easy and it's short. But honestly, I'm not really feeling it. So I tried watching We Never Learn. I watched the second episode, watched the first episode last time, and I didn't quite care for it. Gonna be real honest. I remember enjoying the first episode a fair bit. I mean, I thought the setup for the premise was kind of dumb, but I was willing to accept it in order to get like an entertaining show. I thought the character designs are pretty good, and I still feel that way. I think they have a very unique, weirdish, like kind of like angular look to them that I like. I like it a lot. It stands out in a good way. I like the color design quite a bit. Um, but watching the second episode, I just kind of realized that there's nothing that it's offering me at all. There's not much enjoyment that I was really taking away from it. Like, if I were to list the elements I liked about it, I mean, I like the aesthetic, um, the long haired. I mean, most of the girls are like a baseline level of cute, but the only character that like really appeals to me was the flat chested, long haired girl, who's got like a really vapid expression on her face, which I like. It's pretty funny. Um, but when it comes to any deeper elements, like the animation is decent but not impressive. The characters themselves are just kind of bland. They are their archetype, and that's it. Their interactions never felt like, in as much as I experienced them, it felt like they really went anywhere where that it really had anything beyond these characters love him for because he did a nice thing one time. It reminded me a lot of Nisekoi. However, the reason I like Nisekoi is because, first off, it doesn't take itself seriously at all. Like, if you take Nisekoi seriously, you're doing it wrong. Uh, it's much better visually because it's like Shaft. It's very quirky. The characters are way more over exaggerated. Um, Generally, it just has much stronger leaning towards comedy, and it's much funnier, and all the characters are way more attractive and appealing and interesting. Even if, like, sure, they can be a little one note. There's so much more to them than any of the characters thus far, and they're much more immediately engaging. Um, and I think really my biggest problem with We Never Learn is just that it's not really funny at all. Um, Most of the dialogue is pretty trite, and I just found myself wishing like it was giving me something. Because, like I said, I wasn't getting anything out of the character interactions. I just and it didn't. The soundtrack isn't spectacular or anything. There's just nothing that it was offering me that I couldn't get better elsewhere. Especially since, like, it's not to say that I'm generally find myself being a huge fan of most harems, and also the fact that I know 100% that there's not going to be any type of serious relationship established by the end of the series because it's only like 12 episodes long, and this is an ongoing shonen manga. So it's kind of disappointing. It's kind of just like, well, I already know what path this is going behind. It's going to be pretty formulaic, and as much as I've seen, I don't care for the formula. So that's that. So this section was going to be on Mix, the not quite sequel, but same world, uh, 25 years later, I think. Uh, Mix, the 25 years later version of Touch. I think that's the title, I'm pretty sure. And I was watching it, enjoying it, and then I realized it's actually two cores, and it was just listed wrong on any list as 13 episodes when it's actually 24, I want to say. So, yeah, unfortunately, gonna have to put that one back on hold. We'll get to it when it's done. I think there's decent odds that I'll actually finish it. Finishing a more than one course show, that's crazy news for me. Um, but instead, I want to talk about a show that I actually kind of forgot that I watched because I watched it so like a decent while ago, and that is Rilakkuma to Kaoru-san. This is the Netflix show, the Netflix stop animation show based on the popular mascot Rilakkuma, which is just this big like teddy bear character, and it's like a whole brand. There's other little characters in this sort of like series, um, and the anime is pretty great. I mean, first off, I already was interested and invested because it was stop motion, something that you really don't see a lot coming out of Japan, or at least um, in as much as it's in my purview, I certainly don't see very much of it because it definitely counts as anime in my eyes. It's animated, it's from Japan. I would call that anime. And thinking about it, I can't think of really any other times I've seen something that stop motion that was was Japanese. There's that puppet show, but that's not quite the same thing. But it's sort of in a similar vein that I've heard a lot of really positive things about. But other than that, I can't think of many examples. So already I was quite intrigued. I like stop motion a lot. I used to be really into doing it myself, and I think it's a very like interesting art form. So I really just like the way the show looks visually. I like all the character designs, and I think it really does live up to that, the cuteness that would be implied by the nature of the show. But what I think brings it to a better, like an upper echelon, is sort of just the feeling of watching the show itself. It's got this very warm, comforting, pleasant atmosphere that is like a lot of shows that I really love, where it just sort of brings you into this world and you can live there for however many episodes it is. I think 13, 12 episodes, and each episode is only like half length. So really it's like it's very easy to just go through in a single evening. It's very comfy and very pleasant, and while it's structured in a very, slice of life manner, and I would refer to it as such, it does have enough happening that there's a sense of like progression, like events from previous episodes apply to later ones, characters change and develop. Um, for instance, like she orders a bunch of exercise gear, and that's just there throughout for the rest. Like it applies. It's not like everything is totally disconnected, and it gives a sense of steady progression. You feel like you're following this sort of chapter in the main character's life, Kaoru-san. Um, and it's got this very bittersweet uh, aspect to it that I think plays well into the atmosphere of it all, where y- y-
uh, the often the things that are happening with her are quite negative, and her state of mind is quite negative. But there's always like enough of an olive branch extended that it doesn't feel mean spirited. And also in the fact that she is deeply flawed as a character, and I don't necessarily mean deeply flawed in that like she's a really bad person, but that she has a lot of genuine character uh, issues, like human problems, human personality problems. She's pretty down on herself. She's often not proactive about improving her situation. She's bad with money. She's driven quick. She's driven by impulse. Um, like she's not the wisest character out there, but that's pretty relatable. Not many people are super wise or always think very much before they act. I think most people can understand someone being driven by a quick desire, especially when it's with regard to something very, intimate, such as being lonely and desiring connection. And I think that's like Rilakkuma touches on a lot of these aspects, but in a way that feels accessible. It feels like almost like talking to a therapist or just talking to someone about your problems, where it's like you get it off of you, um, and it's like a release. It's very cathartic, and it doesn't present it in such a harsh way that it is really much of a downer. It's always make sure to have that uplifting side to it. That's why Rira Kuma is there, and the other bear, or really the whole rest of the cast is there to sort of bring the mood up and remind us that there are these those pleasant moments that make it really worth it. Um, this is paired with a great soundtrack that really embodies all of those elements. Um, and just generally, yeah, I had a wonderful time with it. It's one of those shows that gets you tearing up without like really even thinking about the fact that that's happening. Like just the pure like atmosphere of it, that it's so emotionally rich. Um, uh, Go watch Hiding Public's video on it. That's all I have to say.